The man just wanted to find a quiet place to be alone. Unfamiliar with the area, he stumbled into a basement bar by mistake, but he'd barely sat down when a scantily clad dancer came over to hit on him. He wanted to turn her down, but suddenly saw a colleague walk in. To avoid his coworker, he had to follow the woman to a booth on the second floor. He handed her some cash, but no matter how she tried to entice him, he remained unmoved. His strange behavior made the woman think he was an undercover cop, so she cursed and shoved the money back at him. The man was left standing there awkwardly, but this chance encounter would soon completely rewrite both of their lives. Doug used to have a happy family. They had a lovely daughter named Emily, but a sudden car accident took Emily from their life forever. The tragic news was like a bomb, destroying the family's happiness and peace. His wife, Lois, blamed herself for their daughter's death. Trapped by guilt for 10 years, she hasn't dared to step foot outside. She turned herself into an island, and the air in the house was suffocating, filled with the bitter taste of longing every second. Doug watched his wife slip further away each day, while his own heart was filled with just as much pain. But he didn't know how to comfort her, or how to face the despair, so he chose to escape. He started playing poker night after night, and eating late-night meals alone at a diner. That's how he met a waitress named Vivian. He saw her as a temporary confidant he could talk to. He even invited her on a business trip to New Orleans. But fate played a cruel trick. Vivian suddenly died of a heart attack. He went to the cemetery to pay his respects to Vivian, then turned to visit his daughter. But there, he unexpectedly bumped into Lois, had already picked out grave plots for both of them. In that moment, all of Doug's pent-up emotions finally exploded. He demanded to know why she would do such a thing. His wife was trapped in the past, even planning their future around death. With his only source of comfort gone, it felt like their home was truly nothing but ruin. That night, Lois hovered outside the door for a long time, wanting to patch things up with Doug, but in the end, she turned and walked away. Inside the room, Doug couldn't hold it in anymore, burying his face in his hands and sobbing. When an adult breaks down, it's never with hysteria, but in a corner where no one can see, quietly letting their heart shatter. Filled with exhaustion and confusion, Doug still set off on his business trip to New Orleans. He thought it would be just another escape, never expecting that this trip would completely change his and Lois's lives. Once in New Orleans, his colleagues kept bragging about their conquest, behavior that Doug couldn't bring himself to condone. He didn't want to listen to their boring chatter anymore, so he sneaked out of the venue, just wanting to find a place to hide. But since he wasn't familiar with the area, he stumbled into a dive bar by mistake. Under the dim light, a dancer named Allison hit on him. She had a maturity on her face that didn't match her age. Doug intended to decline, but seeing his colleagues walk in, he had no choice but to follow Allison to a booth upstairs. He paid her, and said earnestly, "I'm not here for a good time." Allison reminded him so much of his young daughter. Doug couldn't help but ask her age and name. This strange behavior made Allison mistake him for an undercover cop, so she cursed and shoved the money back at him. However, a turning point came quickly. Doug was eating at a nearby diner when Allison showed up there too. When she turned around, she spotted Doug, accustomed to doing business in the dark, exposed under the bright light. She was visibly on edge. Doug approached to explain, clarifying that he wasn't a cop, just a businessman in town for work. Then he returned to his seat. Allison finally let her guard down, and immediately went to apologize. She explained that business had been slow, and she couldn't even pay the rent she owed. If the police caught her again, her life would be completely over. She got up to settle her bill, but Doug stepped in and paid for her. Doug was deep in his own pain, yet he still reached out to help the struggling Allison. He didn't see her as a prostitute, but as a child who needed care, just like the daughter he failed to protect, Emily. He gave Allison some extra cash, hoping to help her through this rough patch. That night, Doug walked Allison home. Her place was cramped, messy, and out of power, so they talked by candlelight. To thank Doug for his help, Allison tried her best to seduce him, only to be rejected once again. Seeing her confusion, Doug offered no explanation, pretending instead to be asleep. They spent a quiet night together, devoid of romance or lust, just two lonely souls seeking warmth. The next day, a work call woke Doug up. He went to use the bathroom, but the stench inside was unbearable, so he hurried back out. He gently tucked Allison in, accidentally noticing the scars on her arm. He froze on the spot, wondering what a girl her age had really been through. Back at the hotel, Doug pulled out a photo of his daughter, Emily. Allison bore a certain resemblance to the Emily in the picture. His longing for his daughter grew intense, and he suddenly made a decision. He was going to help this girl. Doug called Lois first to let her know he was safe. Then he said he'd be staying in New Orleans a while longer. He just couldn't explain the exact reason right then, but this vague update sent Lois's imagination running wild. She wrongly assumed their marriage was in crisis again. After Doug finished his work, he brought some cleaning supplies to Allison's place. Allison was still asleep, so Doug got to work on his own. First, he fixed the the power. Then he unclogged the toilet. Just like a father, he quietly tidied up Allison's messy home. And all of this was seen by Allison when she woke up. Just as Doug and Allison were growing closer, Lois, back at home, made a shocking decision of her own. Thinking her husband had a new lover in New Orleans, and to win back his heart, she, who hadn't left the house in 10 years, decided to drive there to find him. But she was stumped the moment she got in the driver's seat. She spent nearly an hour struggling, but couldn't even get the seat adjusted. 10 years of isolation had left her completely out of sync with the world, but she didn't give up. Early the next morning, she got dressed up and got back in the car to try again. She finally managed to drive out of the garage. Meanwhile, Doug had started looking after Allison like a father. He made a proposition to Allison. After spending 2 days together, Allison slowly let down her guard. She was sure Doug wouldn't hurt her, and she'd get a steady income every day. After weighing her options, she finally agreed to the deal. Just like that, they began living like father and daughter. During the day while Allison slept, Doug would quietly clean the apartment and tidy up the room. When the landlord came to harass Allison again, Doug immediately stepped up like a father and unceremoniously kicked him out. Every morning before dawn, he went to the bar right on time to pick Allison up from work. He also patiently taught her how to properly manage her own money. Although they seemed to be living together peacefully, there were underlying issues that couldn't be ignored. Allison was a stripper, after all. Her conversations were inevitably laced with vulgar and crude topics, but Doug already saw her as a daughter, so hearing her talk like that made him incredibly uncomfortable. To help Allison develop a healthier lifestyle, Doug decided to start by improving her living environment. First, he paid out of his own pocket to replace all the bedding in the apartment with new ones. Then, he taught her how to keep her place tidy. It was just a seemingly ordinary remark, but it hit Allison in her most sensitive and vulnerable spot. No one had ever patiently taught her such small things, and no one had ever treated her like a child who needed looking after. She craved that warmth, yet feared it might vanish at any moment, so she masked her feelings with profanity and aggression. That night, Doug was sound asleep when he got a call from Allison. When he rushed over, he found out that a client had played her, and her $900 in cash was stolen. Allison wanted Doug to help her get the money back, but Doug calmly said she should either call the police or just let it go. Who carries their life savings out to meet a client? Allison had a complete meltdown. She decided to go find the money herself. Doug tried his best to persuade her to go home first, but Allison was in a fit of rage. Suddenly, she stopped, clutching her head in agony. Seeing the despair in Allison's eyes, Doug's anger vanished instantly. He crouched down to comfort her, telling her everything would be okay. He felt he had been too hasty, and that he should have been more patient with her. Meanwhile, Lois was finally able to get back on the road. During a rest stop, a man nearby took a liking to her and kept trying to chat her up. As they talked, he even offered to buy her a drink. Lois was honest with him that she hadn't felt that way in a long time, but she still turned him down. Right now, she just wanted to save her crumbling marriage. Early the next morning, Doug woke Allison up to wash her dirty clothes. Allison actually stripped naked and threw the clothes at him, spewing profanities. Then she wrapped herself in the sheet and went back to sleep. Doug couldn't take it anymore. He decided he had to set some rules. Doug shoved Allison into a corner, but strangely, instead of being angry, she actually felt a faint sense of happiness, because in her mind, this was exactly how a father should discipline her, teaching her right from wrong, and within that discipline lay the fatherly love she had craved for so long. When they went to the laundromat together, it was dead silent. Allison broke the ice first, sincerely apologizing to Doug. Just as things between Doug and Allison were starting to get better, Doug suddenly got a call from Lois. She had actually driven to New Orleans all by herself. She called to ask her husband to pick her up. The moment Doug saw Lois, he was completely stunned. For 10 years, he'd tried everything to get Lois to leave the house. Now, not only was she here, but she was in great spirit. Doug was both shocked and overjoyed. He felt like everything he had lost was slowly coming back. He wanted to introduce Lois to Allison, but he was afraid Lois would misunderstand. And sure enough, when Lois heard that Allison was a stripper, she instantly panicked. She thought Doug had found a new flame in New Orleans, and that was why he didn't want to come home. But when she saw Allison, she realized this girl was the same age as Emily. She even looked a bit like her. She couldn't accept the fact that her own husband was actually taking care of a girl who was the same age as their daughter, stripper who was the same age. She immediately turned to flee. Doug chased after her to explain, but no matter what he said, she just wouldn't listen. Doug's patience eventually ran out, so he told her to stay outside and cool off by herself. It wasn't until late that night that they both finally calmed down. She didn't actually blame Doug. She was afraid that because of Allison, he would completely forget Emily. She feared their family would never be the same. but she also knew Doug wasn't an irresponsible man. He must have his reasons for taking care of Allison. Doug didn't answer. He couldn't distinguish if his feelings for Allison were fatherly love or a way to make amends. Caring for Allison reminded him of Emily and the regret of not seeing his daughter grow up. But he knew clearly that Allison wasn't a replacement. She was just a kid who needed a hand. In Allison's simple view of the world, Doug was a good guy, so his wife must be a good person too. That's why when she saw Lois at the house, she wasn't the least bit angry. Instead, she warmly invited her out to dinner. She also kept emphasizing that her relationship with Doug was strictly platonic. Allison opened up about her own past. Her mother had also died in a car accident when she was only 4 or 5. Those memories had become a blur over time. Two women who had experienced such loss seemed to see themselves in each other's stories. Allison understood then that Doug's kindness wasn't just pity or compensation. It was the courage of broken souls warming each other. Lois also realized her husband wasn't looking for a new lover. That in saving Allison, he was saving himself from being swallowed by grief. In the middle of the night, Lois sensed something was wrong. She went to the bathroom to check, only to find Allison curled up in agony. She said her stomach felt like it was being stabbed with needles, and even using the toilet was a struggle. Listening to Allison describe the pain, considering the nature of her work, Lois immediately guessed the cause. She woke her sleeping husband right away and told him to go buy some medicine. She nursed Allison with great care, her every gesture filled with tenderness, as if she were caring for her own daughter. Later, Lois learned that the source of Allison's illness was her undergarment. She hadn't bought new ones in years, and she also had a habit of stashing tips inside her clothes, which eventually caused an infection. For the sake of Allison's health, the next day, Lois took Allison to the mall and personally helped her pick out underwear. She even thoughtfully adjusted the straps for her. Her gentleness drew a compliment from Allison, but the words hit a sore spot for Lois. Seeing the change in Lois's expression, Allison quickly apologized. Lois finally opened up and spoke of the time she followed her daughter. That day, Doug had gone out to play cards, and she stayed up waiting for him as usual. But unexpectedly, she saw her daughter, Emily, get into her boyfriend's car. In a panic, she didn't think twice. She threw on some clothes and chased after them. When they spotted her, they sped up to escape. They drove too fast for Lois to catch up. Finally, she watched helplessly as they ran a stop sign and collided with a large truck. The scene instantly turned into a sea of fire. This incident became a knot in Lois's heart. She always blamed herself, thinking if she hadn't chased them, the tragedy might not have happened. After hearing this, Allison comforted her with the story of her own mother's car accident. Lois then took the selected underwear and went to the register to pay. Doug stood off to the side, looking at the pile of gaudy, colorful styles, with a frown, clearly unimpressed by Allison's taste. But to the passers-by around them, they looked like a happy, harmonious family of 3. Not long after, before Allison had fully recovered, she was desperate to get back to work at the club. Lois was heartbroken and worried, urging her to take a few days off to heal. But Allison stubbornly insisted, no work means no food. This sparked a fierce argument, but despite the fighting, they couldn't stop her from leaving. Realizing there was no point in staying, Lois silently began to pack, deciding to head home the next day. Doug didn't say a word. That night, Doug waited outside, hoping for news from Allison. It wasn't until late that he finally received a call. Allison was in trouble again. It turned out that while she was with a client, she was caught in a police raid. But considering her young age, the police weren't too hard on her. They said that as long as bail was posted, she could be released into their custody. Doug and Lois didn't hesitate. They rushed to the station to bail her out. On the drive back, a heavy silence filled the car. The tension was suffocating, but when they stopped at a red light, Allison suddenly threw the door open and bolted. Doug chased after her, frantically asking where she was going, but Allison just shouted a few final words, then ran off without looking back. Watching her disappear, Doug knew deep down that he and Lois couldn't save her. They finally realized that no one can replace those you've lost, and you can't force someone to change their life. Early the next morning, Doug and his wife packed up to go home. Before leaving, Doug left some money with a neighbor to pass along to Allison, hoping it might help her out if she ever found herself in need. Then, the two of them left the city. After returning home, they gradually settled back into their old routine, until one day, Doug suddenly received a call from Allison. On the phone, Allison sounded like a completely different person. Gone was the immaturity and impatience of the past, replaced by a tone that was much more grounded, and having left that life behind, her entire demeanor seemed transformed, radiating a vitality that had been missing for so long. Over the phone, Allison earnestly thanked Doug for the warmth he had shown her. She said she would follow Lois's advice and start a brand new life in another city. She also sent her best wishes again to the couple who had helped her voice filled with sincerity. After hanging up, Allison picked up the suitcase Doug had given her, and without a moment's hesitation, resolutely boarded the bus, heading for a new city. She knew that this time, she was walking firmly toward a fresh start that truly belonged to her. Some might think, this is just a cliché story of a middle-aged man saving a lost girl, but in truth, Welcome to the Rileys is about mutual redemption. They were like three broken puzzle pieces, full of cracks when alone, but forming a complete picture when put together. True warmth is never about forcing change, but about embracing each other's brokenness. Lois couldn't keep her own daughter, but in the process of caring for Allison, she slowly unlocked the shackles of her guilt. Doug had been avoiding the cracks in his marriage, but through their shared days of protecting Allison, he found his way back to his wife. Allison was used to masking herself with indifference, but within the kindness of this couple, she rediscovered a longing for a normal life. Although none of them could fully erase the pain of the past, yet, within each other's life, they learned to live with regret and walk with warmth. This film reminds us that even in the darkness of life, unexpected tenderness awaits, helping us piece together the courage to move forward.